This book was published in 1958. It was $3. The Historical Society printed 8,000 copies, and we had boxes of them in the basement for years and years and years. This year, the new book is $45 plus tax, and it's wonderful. I mean, it's got color. We're printing them on demand. But anyway,
Glen Historical Society is in the book.
They make wonderful gifts. Yeah. Our story's in the book. We have an ad in the book.
Nice. Yeah.
And we've got it specially coded so that if there are any inquiries to this address, we know they came from this book. It's terrific. I mean, and it's the history basically since 1958. So anyway, that's something to look forward to. Great Christmas present. If you'd come on Sunday, you could have gotten it for, what was it, $40.50 or something?
$43.74.
Well, that was with tax. That was with tax.
Oh, that was the deal for Sunday.
Yeah, $43.74 with tax. But it's now $45 plus tax. So
She remembers it on the rest.
yeah, she wrote her check.
I thought it was a bargain. I thought I was going to pay $45.
We still have Cat's Meows pieces. Remember, Cat's Meow has been out of business now about 10 years, so when these are sold, they're gone forever. And we have Riecos. Have we reprinted the Riecos?
We have some.
Okay, anyway, no, we've got enough. I mean,
Oh.
this also would make a great Christmas gift. I think that's about it. Oh, and we have the Steamboat books.
Yes.
We have 5 of them.
And your map.
And we have maps. We got maps. We got lots of maps.
Historical postcards.
We got historical postcards. We've got,
Yeah, what are the prices on it? Which one?
Everything.
So the prices are out here.
yeah, we've got new Phyllis Britcher cards, milk cards. Phyllis Britcher had a camp over on the other side. Charlie Anderson's aunt. She was an author and illustrator, and these are illustrations from some of her children's books. She also ran a children's, like a gift shop in, I think in Princeton, wasn't it?
I think so.
In Princeton, New Jersey. And she summered here, and she painted a lot of the originals over here. And she wrote as Romney Gay. Yeah, so you can find Romney Gay books on eBay.
Yeah. And they're $5 for a packet.
$5 for a packet.
$2 each for single.
$2 each. Okay. That's about it for now. The sound is on.
Sound is on.
Okay.
Should be good.
Okay, we have a visitor besides Russ. This is Steve Bodner. Steve is the communications manager of the William G. Pomeroy Foundation. And Steve's going to present us officially with our plaque. I'm going to put these on so we can
How's this? How's the sound on that? Is that okay? All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Steve Bodner. I'm the communications manager for the William G. Pomeroy Foundation, and I just wanted to start off by saying what a delight it is to be here with all of you this evening for this special occasion, for the presentation, and of course to commemorate and reflect on the new National Register plaque. So I have some brief remarks that I'd like to share with you. So on behalf of the Pomeroy Foundation, we would like to thank everyone for their work in contributing to this National Register plaque. for the school and library property. You've done a wonderful job preserving this part of your community's past. To be included on the National Register, as all of you know, of course, is so meaningful and really demonstrates the significance of this property and its architectural history and everything that it means to the community and beyond. The Pomeroy Foundation would like to thank the Glen Historical Society and all those who have been involved with this plaque project and in obtaining it here. You have done an outstanding job and we commemorate you for your efforts. In addition to the National Register, as you know, this property is also on the New York State Register of Historic Places. At the Pomeroy Foundation, one of our main initiatives is to help people celebrate their community's history. Since 2005, when Bill Pomeroy established the foundation, we have funded nearly 900 markers and plaques in 12 states across all of our different signage programs. Thank you so much. We believe that the markers and plaques not only help to preserve history and educate the public, but they also encourage pride of place, promote historic tourism, and also adding to the economic benefits of the community. In addition to our National Register program, we also have several other national programs that I'll just briefly mention this evening. We have our Legends and Lore program, which commemorates folklore. That's in a growing number of states, and we just welcomed our 9th partner, and we're now in 9 different states with that program. Similar to the National Register and Legends and Lore program, we also have another national program, National Women's Suffrage. Next year is the centennial of the 19th Amendment. And we also have a historic transportation canal program, and that program's grant round just opened last week. Again, another national program, really trying to broaden out the different ways in which people look at marker programs and are able to commemorate their history. And you can also, of course, learn more about any of that on our website, and you can talk to me after today's program. But let's return to why you're all here today. Of course, the program, also for the unveiling of the plaque. At the Pomeroy Foundation, we're just so proud to support the Glen Haven Historical Society in your efforts to preserve its history. And it's our hope that this National Register plaque, I hope all of you can see it one way or another, will remain and stand as a testament to the historical importance of the school and library for generations to come. So with that, I thank you and congratulations on your new National Register plaque.
We're also working on a marker down here as soon as we can locate the site of the original school, because Millard G. Fillmore, who became the 13th president, I think, taught for one semester there. And that's the only time a president did anything in Cortland County. Alton B. Parker ran for president, but he never made it. But anyway, he was down there, and I think he was at the intersection with Vincent Hill Road, but I can't establish that definitively.
It's further down the line.
Well,
Yeah,
maybe there is a map.
Yeah.
There's a map that shows the school at the corner of Vincent Hill. I think it was farther on down. I've been working with the Pomeroy Foundation, and because I wasn't sure, we'll get into the next round, which I think for us is November. The Pomeroy Foundation also gave us the marker for Andrew Dixon White's birthplace in Homer, and a number of others. And John Hartsock got one of the legends and lures for David Heron in front of his house. So that's very recent. But we're here not to talk about that so much as Russ Dorn. Originally from Carlisle, Pennsylvania, Russ moved to Homer in 1984 after graduating from Syracuse University, where he earned a bachelor's degree from the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs. Russ's work career has spanned many years in several industries, but it has always included traveling to small towns across upstate New York. Fascinated by the architectural variety of the built environment, especially in these small towns, Russ continued his education through additional coursework at Syracuse University in architectural history, focusing on early 19th century central New York domestic buildings. This advanced coursework, combined with his own large personal library on architecture and design, has allowed him to become a resource and advocate for historic preservation in the local community. Russ serves as president of the Landmark Society of Cortland County, and he played a role in the Village of Homer acquiring Calvary Episcopal Church, the little white church on the Homer Green. Russ lives on South Main Street in an 1803 Federal-style house that he's been working to restore for the past 20 years, and it probably seems like 50.
Now we're starting all over.
Russ is married to Jan, and he is the father of their 3 children, Adam, Aaron, and Hannah. Russ, it's a pleasure to have you here.
What's that?
I said you also work with Anna Tilton.
Oh,
I
sure.
know that.
Well, if any of you, and who knew Anna Hilton?
Amen.
So when I first moved to Homer, and that sounded awfully good. I don't know who wrote that, but that sounded kind of almost impressive. But when I first moved to Homer, and I don't think I need the microphone. If you want me to do it, I will, but I think we'll be okay. Anna was actually one of the first people that I met. And I was walking on the village green, and she was walking on the village green with somebody from the village who trimmed the trees or whatever. And she, of course, was giving orders of the way it needed to be done. And she started talking to me, and I said, well, so what happened to all the Asher Benjamin buildings on the village green? And of course, we were instant friends because most people have never even heard of Asher Benjamin. Well, Asher Benjamin was a guy from Connecticut in the late 1700s that wrote pattern books of architecture. And it just so happens that 3 of the original buildings on the village green in Homer were all Asher Benjamin. None of them are left today, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But that's how Anna and I got to know each other. So I kind of, in a way, feel like, Betty, the reins were kind of handed over to me at some point. I don't know why, and it's more time consuming than you can possibly imagine. But I give it what I can, we'll say that, right, Charlie?
Right.
Right. Who's from Homer? A lot. And then where's everybody else from? This just the general area, just all over central New York, or?
Right here.
Right here. And so is there anybody here that was a member of the Calvary Episcopal Church? One person. So I have to be really careful what I say and how I say it. Because it might not all be good, right?
I'm ready.
You're ready to hear it.
Yeah.
You're ready to hear it.
it.
So we'll avoid politics, we'll avoid religion, we'll avoid those things in general. We'll try to stick to the buildings. But I think what the focus of tonight should be about is what happened to the building. In other words, not only how did it get to look the way it does, but what's happening now and what do we think the future is, hopefully. But anyway, can everybody hear me okay? Okay. So to get started, lots of Homer hands. Homer Village Green, 1842. The Episcopal, we call the Episcopal Church, or the Little White Church on the Green, is the last building on the right. It was actually at that time, and it was only 10 years old in 1842 because it was built in 1832. It was the tallest building on the Green. If you look at it today, it's been reduced twice, at least twice significantly, so it's not the tall building that it was. But when it was originally built, it was built in a new style for the time, Gothic revival, but it was the tallest building on the Green. So just so you're familiar, this is the original Baptist church from 1827. This is actually the original schoolhouse. There were classrooms, 2 classrooms on the first floor, and then the Masonic Lodge on the second floor. And then this is the Congregational Church, built in 1805. The Homer Academy or Cortland Academy, depending on what generation you're from, about 1819, I believe, and then the Episcopal Church is the last one on the right there. you can tell just by looking quickly at that early image that there was a change in architectural style, a change in taste, really more than anything. And keep in mind that the Episcopal Church in this country was very well connected to the Church of England. In fact, it was kind of the Church of England in this country. And so the architectural styles were copied by what was fashionable in England at the time. So I'm going to have to move around a little bit here to move these slides. So, how did the Episcopal Church on the Green in Homer come about? This is Trinity Church in New York City at the end of Wall Street. Wall Street sits right in front of it. This is the current photograph image of it. This is from about 1850. It had burned to the ground in 1776. It was destroyed by a hurricane in the early 1800s, or most of it was, and then it was rebuilt, and by about 1850 it was completed. Does anybody see any similarities? Kind of unusual. Forget the building for a minute. Do you see any similarities between these two pictures? Tower. Forget the architecture. Look around and see if you see anything else, anything different. Did you notice how many people are standing in line? Both then and now, which is really, I think, is really interesting. And I didn't even notice that until I was looking through the slides earlier this week, getting ready for tonight. And I noticed that in this image this is about 1848, the long line of people standing in line to go into church. And then, of course, as tourists, more today than parishioners. The connection to Trinity is a simple one. The Episcopal Church in this country, their mission work, they didn't believe it was about sending people out into the frontier. They thought it was about building churches. The reason there's an Episcopal Church on the Village Green in Homer is Trinity Church funded it. They said, we're going to put a church in that part of New York State because we know it's growing, we know it has a bright future. And that's the connection between New York and Homer. And then, of course, the architecture. You've got spires and pinnacles and Gothic arches and Gothic windows, which are all typical elements within a building from that period. I was shocked to learn that there was a connection between the church in Homer and the church in New York. I shouldn't have been, but I was. So Calvary Episcopal Church, when it was first completed, it didn't look anything like it does today. Completed between 1831 and 32. While I say Mr. Hagerman was supposedly the architect of record, in the 1830s, they had, and this is not the one for that particular building, but here is a pattern book by Asher Benjamin, who we were talking about before. Of course, this is a copy of it, but they were originally produced starting in the 1790s. This one is from, I think, about 1827, but there are actual patterns in these books where the congregation, the minister, whatever, would take this and say, here, build me this. In fact, if you wanted to later, here's a picture of the original Congregational Church on the Village Green in Homer, and here it is in the pattern book. So a lot of people wonder, well, who was the architect? Well, you know who the real architect was whoever created the pattern book. And so Mr. Hagerman, I don't know how much credit he is really due. Maybe a lot. It's hard to tell. What I can tell you is that most of the buildings from that period came from pattern books. Carpenter, easier to identify. I put the question mark Carpenter Gothic because I refer to it as Gothic Revival, and some people refer to it as Carpenter Gothic. They're kind of used interchangeably. But what do you notice about the building in this form, which this is actually a drawing of what the building looked like in 1832 when it was completed. And the drawing, I believe, was done in the 1960s when the church was added to the Historic American Building Survey. So it's actually, talk about the National Register, there's almost a, I won't say more important, but there's maybe a higher level kind of recognition. The Library of Congress sent a team of people across the country in the 50s and 60s to document the most significant historic structures in the country. And that drawing is from 1966 when this church was added to the Historic American Building Survey. So you can go online and Google Haps, Homer, New York, Cortland, New York, and you'll find a few buildings, including this one. But what do you notice about this one that's different than today? Impression? It was a lot taller. Okay, a lot of changes over the years. Some of it was deterioration, some of it was overbuilt. And when I say overbuilt, one of the really beautiful attributes of a Gothic building like that is the height of it. But the building actually, in many cases, couldn't withstand its own weight. And part of the reason why it was lowered 2 times in its existence is because the building just could not tolerate the weight. There's a 750-pound bell up in the steeple. There was a clock, there were spires, there was castellation. These are called spires or pinnacles, and this is called castellation. Then you have Gothic arched windows. And of course it was taller and newer than anything on the green for a long time. It actually sat on a foundation which was the basement was 9 feet height originally, and it was chopped down 4 feet to 5. You can crawl around in there kind of like this now. But they used to have all the town meetings there. That's where the town of Homer met, was in the basement of the Episcopal Church. If that building could be restored to that, what you see right there, regardless of the number, what it would take, what it would cost, it would be more than spectacular. It would be, in the likes of St. Patrick's Cathedral, in my mind. Of course, New York City is a different scale, but that would be an exceptional building. It's still exceptional, but it would be even better. So, talking about pattern books like before, who did the pattern book? Well, there actually was a guy whose name was Batty Langley, and he lived in England in 1742. He started publishing pattern books of Gothic architecture. And here's a building, the top of the building that he created, designed, and there's the cover of his book. And then here again I show you what the building in Homer, what the Episcopal Church in Homer looked like originally.
Who's named the child Batty? Doesn't that mean like crazy?
The English. We'll blame it on the English, since they're not here to defend themselves. Okay, so some changes were made, to say the least. In 1890, they did a series of modifications to the building, starting in 1890, because things continued to be changed over the period of time. But the records show that Zalora Hogue, there's a funny name for it, Zalora, contractor of modifications, mostly interior foundation, lower top section of tower removed, 1931, pinnacles removed in 1890 and 1931. So you can see, here's the original drawing. There's an image of the original building after it had been lowered. None of the steeple work had been done yet, but it was lowered. And then by 1931, that's the way it looks today. That's how much the building changed. So over the course of 40 years, it went from being this building to that building.
How do you lower a patient? Do you know?
They actually lowered the building itself. So they jacked it up, put new supports underneath the building and lowered it. Why they wanted to lower it, I have no idea, because there used to be, this was a full height door for a human. 6-foot door, 6.5-foot door. There was a door here in the front, and then there was a door here in the front, and they both went into the downstairs. And the basement was one just giant big room. You can go in it today, you have to kneel because it's not 9 feet. But the plaster work is still in place. The furnace is in there. The hot water heater's in there. But they lowered it because they didn't think they were going to use that space anymore.
It's a wooden building?
Wooden building, timber frame, wooden building. Timber frame, of course, being built like a barn. If you took the clapboards off of it and all the sheathing off of it, you'd end up with a timber frame structure.
Stone foundation?
Stone foundation. Yep, hand-laid stone, dry originally, no mortar. They didn't think it was necessary. They also believed that a little ventilation was healthy for the building, which it was. Different concept of building at that time. So lowered, and then the clock tower section was removed. The upper tower was removed and replaced with what you see over there on the right. And so if you didn't know about this, you'd say that's a beautiful building. Painted white, beautiful stained glass, everything well taken care of, beautiful building. But what you don't know, unless you look at these slides, or do the research is this is what it looked like originally, and instead of having stained glass, it would have been all divided lights, all hand blown, all beautifully painted. We actually have a couple of the original windows. We saved them, and I think they're in the kitchen, right, Charlie? Against one of the walls. But we have some of the original pieces. Some of it was sold off, unfortunately. The church went through a lot of ups and downs financially over the years, and there was at one point a time when they just wanted to get rid of whatever they could and turn it to cash. And some of the really magnificent Gothic windows were sold to antique dealers. But we do have, I think, either 2 or 3 of the smaller sections of the original windows, which is great because it allows us to document what was actually there originally. Any questions? This is a floor plan from the 1966 Haps Historic American Building Survey. The front of the church is out here. The most important parts of the church were up here. This was added on to, though, at some point. My notes show it somewhere. I don't see it on here, but this drawing was 1966. Originally, the altar, you came in under the altar, and the altar was here, which is the east end of the building. When they enlarged the church, they moved it to the back, which is where it is now. This is the west. Seated 260 people then, seats 260 people today. So in the process of getting the building kind of cleaned up a little bit for use, we trimmed back a lot of the shrubbery, took some of the stuff out, and we found the original cornerstone. Calvary Church organized June 6, 1831. This stone lay June 21st, I think, 1832, and then relayed. So when they did the major alterations to the building, July 14th, 1890, which is when the interior was also changed dramatically. That's the original cornerstone, which is like finding a treasure. I mean, when we started looking and seeing what it was, we couldn't even believe how great it was. So here's some notes from the research that we did on the building. Since construction, it's had a total of 26 years of not being used, just sitting dormant. In fact, the last handful of years, 2 or 3 years, is really what created an opportunity for the village, with some encouragement, to take over the building, because it was literally going to be either torn down or removed intentionally for a parking lot for the school, or nobody really had any idea what was going to happen to it, because nobody could figure out who was doing what and who actually owned it and all of that. So once all that stuff was figured out, and then a little bit of pressure on the mayor from the Landmark Society, and guess what? We took it over. So the village owns it. Bought it for $1, which is the way old buildings like that should be bought, and signed a 99-year lease with the First Religious Society, who actually owns and controls the village green in Homer. A little bit complicated situation, because part of the church, the main part of the church, sits on First Religious Society property, but the parish house, which is attached to it, which is another wonderful building from 1916, sits on a separate parcel. So there was a lot of investigative work that had to be done to figure out who owned what and who was going to agree to what and how this was all going to happen. But we worked it all out, and so the village now owns it and is in the process of putting it back together correctly. So 1890, 4 feet in height was removed. It talks about the Gothic battlements being removed. It was shingled with slate and stained glass. The stained glass, the last time I did this presentation, we were actually in the church, so I didn't have to do too much describing, because people could look at the beautiful stained glass and look at the beautiful condition. In fact, when I get to my last slide, there's some photographs of the interior of it, because I'm thinking, wait a minute, we're not doing the presentation at the Little White Church. How did I forget that? Talk about it, and then I'm not going to be able to show it to you. But anyway, so there's stained glass. It was actually cataloged, mail order stained glass. Believe it or not, in 1890, there were catalogs that you could order stained glass from. And I talked to Crawford and Stearns up in Syracuse, and they said, Beth Crawford said, oh yeah, she said, we have the catalogs here. They used to go through and pick out the colors they wanted, and that was all news to me. I figured they were all done by hand. You know, somebody from Tiffany or somebody came here and, you know, did it by hand. Anyway, that's the story with the stained glass. The stained glass is about 99.9% in good shape. There are just a couple of pieces where the gravity has a tendency of pushing it down a little bit, and the lead between the lights is a little soft sometimes, and so there is some maintenance that has to be done. But generally speaking, the stained glass is in almost wonderful condition. Inside, ceiling, Gothic ceiling was installed. You'll get a look at that in one of the slides in a little bit. Church was reoriented, new pews, a new bell was cast. They went from having a 750-pound bell in the steeple to 750 to 1,500-pound bell. Twice the weight, twice the size. Which I almost wondered if part of the reason for reducing the height of the steeples was to accommodate a larger bell, and the only reason for a larger bell would have been a bigger noise. So, I don't know, is that what churches do to market themselves in the 1800s? I've got a bigger bell, it's going to make more noise, we must be a happier congregation. See, I told you I was going to be friendly about that part. Anyway, so new bell, new frame, new pew, the whole interior, everything was updated and changed. And then some research at the Syracuse Standard, and I was amazed at how much detail there was. You can look at this. This is right out of the Syracuse Standard, 1890. Talk about starting it, who's going to do it. 1890, July 4th, the work begun. How the basement was once used as the town hall, and now they're not going to use it for anything anymore. I guess. What kind of heat would that have been? I don't know. Maybe they were trying to accommodate a different kind of heating system, because a lot of the early church buildings weren't heated at all. None. No heat. And most of them had 2 services a day, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. The arched ceiling of Georgia pine is there today. It's actually been frescoed and covered over with paint. And if you had an unlimited budget, you could reveal the murals that are on the walls, and you could reveal the frescoes that are on the ceilings in the building. Right now, everything's covered with paint because that's what people did. They got tired of a style or a fashion or whatever, and they would often cover over with paint. And then the exterior will be repaired and repainted in tasty colors. And I, to this day, can't imagine what a tasty color is. I could almost hear Anna saying that, though. It's a tasty color from a whole nother generation. Here's where it talks about, this is the last page of this type of thing, I think, but here's where it talks about new furnace, organ, seats, carpets, ride, stained glass windows, the altar, which interestingly, the church, the Episcopal Church in Homer and the Episcopal Church in Moravia were kind of sister churches, and the Episcopal Diocese of Central New York, when they decided to close Homer, close the Village Green location down, they moved the most important furniture to Moravia. And so after a couple of phone calls, we found out that most of that original church furniture, including the chairs and the high altar and everything, had been moved to Moravia and was still there in a room waiting for somebody to come and get it. So we've already been over once, and we've already collected what my vehicle would take. And we're planning, as soon as we have a space for it, to go over and get the altar, and there's another chair. We got the baptismal, which is marble and oak. It's just beautiful. A lot of the furniture in the church from 1890 we have recovered in one way or another. It all hasn't been physically moved back to Homer yet, but we have that underway, which I think is absolutely amazing. And then it mentions the parish house being erected in 1916, and I'm going to show you one of the surprises that we found when we opened up the parish house at Ceiling. Great building. So there's the Episcopal Church today, the Little White Church. We call it the Little White Church on the Green. Here it is today in its present form. Again, a reminder, kind of like a ghost, if you will, of what it looked like then. And then this castellated tower right here came from England the design idea came from England. Here's a country house of Lord somebody from the 1890s, and that was the style of the day. They were kind of moving away from high Victorian and something more Middle Ages, I guess. And then I have a couple of pictures of just other similar churches in terms of the architecture. This one, I don't remember where this one is from, but one of these is from Green, which of course isn't very far. One of them is from Rochester, which isn't very far. And just to give you an idea how popular the style became, this is the one from Green, believe it or not. Pinnacles, castellation, arched windows, arched doorways, just typical elements of that particular style. And then the one on the bottom right there, that's the Episcopal Church in New Haven, Connecticut, on the Village Green next to the Yale campus. You can see how similar, especially the upper part. And then I dropped this photo in here because does anybody recognize that? Downton Abbey? That's the Highclere Estates, the main house at Highclere. And look at you've got the same style of architecture going on in multiple locations at multiple times, certainly, and at a much higher price. But you can see where the influence was coming from. It was coming from England. Remember, the Episcopal Church was still tied to the Church of England to some extent. There's Berlin, one in Berlin, Germany. The same type of architecture. And then again, the same building in Homer, our building. The building that belongs to all of us now. Rochester. So Homer built 1832. Rochester's first Episcopal church was built in 1838. This is kind of what it looked like with the landscape and some other old buildings around, but this is what it still looks like today. Built of stone and brick, so it was able to withstand the weight of the tower, but the architecture is very, very similar to what we have in Homer on the green.
Is it also funded by Trinity?
Yes. Yeah. Trinity Church in New York today, if you go to Wikipedia or wherever do your research, do you have any idea what their endowment is?
It's huge.
$6 billion.
Okay. I didn't know
So
it was that big.
Queen Anne in the 1690s
Right.
gave the church had already been in existence for 30 years. Queen Anne gave them, we were still under English control, gave them like 12 acres or 15 acres in Manhattan, which they still own today. But you can imagine the value of, say, 15 acres in Manhattan today. So their stated endowment right now is $6 billion. So they've always been a wealthy church, to say the least. Here are a couple of peeks into the kind of the guts of the church building. This is a rear wall and a side wall and a ceiling, and there's a drop ceiling of lath and plaster that was put under it. And so we had to go up into the attic to try to identify some of the designs and patterns that exist today behind the earlier layers of wall and paint. And this is what we found. And then this is the Parish Hall, excuse me, next door. They're connected. And the Parish Hall, built in 1916, had a drop ceiling. Almost like if you put a drop ceiling in here, excuse me, that was maybe 7 feet at my head. And you opened it up one day and you're like, holy cow.
And that's the way it works.
This is great. And so when we opened it up, there are these trusses and this beautiful work that was totally forgotten. Well, everybody stood around with their mouth open because they couldn't believe that this building, this space was so beautiful and dramatic. So anyway, it's also part of this whole project of creating a community center. It's another space. It's got beautiful windows, the original windows there that need to be reglazed and some of them replaced and everything. And I don't have any more pictures of that, but before too long you'll be able to see it firsthand. But you can imagine what we drop ceiling opened up and start to see what was been behind there.
And the games
look like a cross the way they're.
Yeah, they are magnificent. And that's the bell that's there today, 1,500 pounds, cast in Troy, at a foundry in Troy, New York. And then this is the last slide. This shows the interior today. You can see the condition of it, stained glass, everything pretty much painted white and off-white. The organ we just have retuned, and organ is 99.9% perfect. We had a guy from Syracuse come down. The organ was built by a pastor who built like 7 churches, or 7 organs for churches around the central New York area in the southern tier. So it's a wonderful organ. The quilt that's hanging there was on loan, Charlie, from the Cortland County Historical, and who signed it? I forget. It was all of the faculty and students at the Homer Academy in 1890, right? Yeah. And we had done we were using the building for an event, and one of the things that we did, Charlie got from the Historical Society that quilt. You can see it a little better over there. But you can tell just from the photographs how wonderful the condition of the interior is. No, we don't have murals on all the walls, and no, we don't have frescoes on the ceiling. They're hidden at this point, but the church is in wonderful condition. And here's this is a priest's chair. This is one of the chairs that was over in Moravia. This was something that fit in my back of my car. So we moved it that day. What did I talk them out of? Their Bible too. They had the original Bible, right?
Original Bible, yeah.
The original Bible for the Episcopal Church in Homer, and they didn't want to give it up. And I don't know, what did I say to them, Charlie? I must have said the right thing.
Well, we cried.
The approach is it just needs to go back to Homer. That's usually what works.
And it was donated by the Sherman family.
And it was donated by the Sherman family, exactly. And so there's another chair, and then there's the high altar, which weighs 700 pounds, and it's going to take 8 gorillas to carry us. But we'll get to that at some point. But this is what the interior looks like, which kind of brings me to the point which I think is what you wanted to hear about, and that's what's the future. Well, because the village has stepped in and helped out, as opposed to like the Landmark Society trying to take on the responsibility. We don't have the staff, we don't have the funding, we don't have anything. The village already has in place, maintenance people to do paint work, to do masonry work, and yes, we're going to spend a little bit of money on it for sure. There's no doubt about that. But the future of this building was headed towards demolition, and what's going to happen now is it's going to turn into the Little White Church Community Center. And the main part of the sanctuary, the acoustics are perfect. You can stand in the front, in the upper part of the church, and speak with a normal voice, and everybody in the room can hear every single thing you say. We think it's because of the arch vaulted ceiling. We think it causes the sound to come back down, as opposed to in a square room. I guess sound gets stuck in the corners. But anyway, the acoustics are perfect. We did a Christmas kind of festival thing there with just absolutely wonderful. It's a wonderful, wonderful space. It just needs to be brought up to snuff in terms of code so that we can start using it again. We're planning to put 2 new bathrooms in. Between the main building and the Parish Hall, there's kind of a connection. We call it a hyphen in architecture. But in that space was where the pastor's office was, and it's big enough that we're going to be able to create 2 handicap accessible bathrooms there, and then at some point possibly a catering kitchen in another part of the building. So its future really is going to be about a community building that people can, go and enjoy. And the Center for the Arts is tickled because they've outgrown their space, and they're looking for more space for classes, for lectures. It's a wonderful place for lecture. It's a wonderful place for a cappella. There's no sound system there to speak of. There doesn't really need to be a sound system in there because of the way the acoustics are. So it's got a really bright future, but what it took a lot of people in the community kind of getting together and saying, we can't let the building get raised, so what can we do? And here's where we are today. Kind of exciting. Question?
Hello, Russ. My name is Harry Higgins. I was a member of the church
Yep.
for many years. And it's all about your faith and what's going on. I didn't really hear you talk about the faith part. Because this little church, home, and that was pretty extraordinary. The acoustics are great.
Mm-hmm.
You're right, and we would sing, everybody would sing. You have some things that have to go on, here and there. And I'm glad that the village is
Mhm.
going to be taking, a role.
Yeah,
That's
big
what's
role.
happening.
Yep.
But you cannot dismiss the fact that this is a church. And it's important for people to recognize that it's a church.
Which is why we're actually bringing back all those pieces of furniture, for example, back to it, because it would be easy because they take up space and they don't necessarily all have a use today. But our kind of mandate with the building was that it would be a church first, and that it's going to look like a church first, and we're not going to make modifications to stray from that.
Remember that.
No, I agree.
Whoever's taking notes.
I agree with you. And let me say that the Christmas festival, what would you call the festival that we did?
Mhm.
We had music and kind of a skit, and people dressed for the holidays, and it was one of the nicest things. And I lived in Homer since 1984, which is a long time. Not born here, but it's the nicest Christmas thing I've ever been to. And part of it is the venue. Yeah, part of it is the venue here.
Standing room only.
It was seriously, it was 260 people. It was standing room only, and the code officer didn't want us in there. So the mayor got in trouble. I got in trouble. Everybody got in trouble. But when you're all in trouble together, it's just not really in trouble. But anyway, so yeah, did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
They attempted to use a public building in the city of Cortland for a Christian school,
Mhm.
and that came to a rough end at some point because they didn't de-emphasize the fact that it was a church group. You can't call this a church, and you could not have religious ceremonies there without endangering the building as an architect or be supported by the public.
Mhm.
I believe, I'm not an attorney, but I know enough to know that.
So
I don't mean to be contrary.
no, is there a question in
What's the
there?
building? What are you talking about?
This is not a church. It cannot be a church and be
Well,
supported by
actually,
the community.
as
It
it-
is
yeah.
architecturally a church, a beautiful church.
Well, I'll just add that the congregation in Moravia, St. Luke's, I can't think of it.
Yeah.
St. Matthew's, thank you, asked us if they could come back every once in a while, maybe a couple times a year, and have a service. And we're like, of course you can. I mean, it's a church. That's what it was built for. That's what it can be used as. But in this world that we live, for whatever reasons, where churches, their congregations are shrinking, their funding is evaporating, a building like this, we had to find a future for it. It had actually spent, as I mentioned, 26 years on and off of being vacant, where it wasn't being used at all for whatever reasons. The church in New York, Trinity, injected money at least once in a big way, and maybe twice. I don't really know for sure. You have to kind of read between the lines a little bit on that. But I think we have a kind of, the Baptist Church in Homer is now the Center for the Arts. The Baptist Church moved out. And I was upset. Everybody was upset, thinking, what's going to happen to this building? And what happened was a group of people in the community got together, formed a board, built an organization, and now it's very successful. In fact, it's the economic driver in Homer right now, in my opinion. It's what's making everything else successful.
Moravia
Because
has
it's just bringing people all the time.
Moravia has 62
62
members. Yeah, 62
Yeah, so
is a
Moravia
big
has
church.
asked, they've already asked, they've said, could we come over a couple times a year maybe and have a service in Homer? And we're like, of course you can, it's a community building. But it's called the Little White Church Community Center. So the word church is still part of the title of what this building is becoming.
So
So,
I think what he's mentioning is that if it's being funded by public funds, there is a separation of church and state.
this one, the
And so
public,
those of us who
yeah,
aren't Episcopal
yeah.
might take offense. Although the other part of me says, wouldn't it be beautiful to have a wedding just bring your own chaplain.
Yeah.
And you can do whatever you wanted to do. So,
Yeah, so to answer your question, you're right about that, and the mayor in Homer has been very clear. He said, we're not gonna carry it forever. We wanna get it stabilized and get it viable and give it a life, and then we'll go from there. Will it become its own nonprofit? Will it become a part of Landmark Society, Village, and Center for the Arts? I don't know. But what I know is I couldn't bear to see the building torn down.
correct.
And that's where that was going.
Right.
And I grew up in the Methodist Church in Pennsylvania, which is very conservative. It's the Bible Belt. So none of these questions and issues are really new to me at all.
Right.
I just know as a lay person, architectural historian, that's all one title. Okay. Self-taught mostly, except for
No, and I
thanks
totally agree.
Syracuse University. But
I totally
you know,
agree with
yeah. So that's where I am. Yeah.
The Center for the Arts has weddings there
Yeah.
quite frequently.
This is a much better venue, in my opinion.
What I'm saying
Yeah.
though is there doesn't seem to be any problem with that, and they are religious ceremonies, so I
But the
would
Center
think,
for the Arts is a private organization.
It's a 501c3. It's a nonprofit.
Yes, it's not.
But it's not publicly
supported by
funded.
the state.
Right. So the money to do what we've tried to do, which has been mostly sweat equity for them, in reality.
Right.
The Village of Homer has a building fund. They have money set aside. They had money set aside for a project that never came to fruition. And the mayor said, I know we have to spend it on a building. We can put some of it into this building to get it stabilized. The
Right.
village guys went in, they serviced the furnaces, they took care of all the broken water lines because the water had been left on through 2 winters. They gutted the basement in the Parish Hall, which was just disgusting. And so that's work that I call absorbed,
Yes.
meaning that we're already paying those people to be on our payroll.
So
They're
you're
just
not
they're working on this building instead of taking a nap in the highway garage.
Correct.
Right.
That's right. Absolutely.
Sorry.
No, I agree with everything you're saying.
So it takes a little pushing and shoving when it comes to historic preservation, as far as I'm concerned. So
And
yes,
Let me offer an explanation of why they might lower that building.
Okay.
Getting back to the architecture, and maybe Joe can help me out here. Was 4 feet of that foundation exposed above grade?
originally it would have been at least that, yeah, because the building
So
sat
maybe
pretty
that's why they
high.
cut it down, Joe. Down,
Okay.
yeah.
I would say that the original building was at least, the stonework was at least exposed by 4 feet. That would be just a guess.
Being exposed to the elements, I would have thought that it would have weakened the foundation. Probably they just decided to make it a grade level.
Well, one of the things that I think is kind of interesting is the whole notion from the Middle Ages in Europe of the Gothic arch. It was supposed to be an engineering innovation. In other words, if you had an arch, you could bear a lot more weight above you, which would allow these enormous towers to be built, like you'd see on some of these buildings. The reality of it is that most of the arch buildings like that, including Trinity Church in New York, the towers were too heavy. The buildings could not withstand it. And that's why the first time in New York it was fire in 1776, 400 buildings in New York burned. And then in the early 1800s, a hurricane or storm of some kind took off the top of Trinity Church. And at the time, it was the tallest building on Manhattan. And the next building with a higher point was the Brooklyn Bridge. But at that time, it was the tallest building in Manhattan. Couldn't bear the weight. So the last time they built Trinity, which was just before 1850, they lowered it. It was actually lowered. So there's a tradition, there's precedent rather, and a tradition of lowering the building because that Gothic arch that was thought to be able to carry any load of weight really couldn't. So there's not just the aesthetic part there with buildings, obviously there's the engineering piece as well. So, any other questions? Thanks for coming out tonight.
We still have refreshments over there. One thing, Andrew Dixon White in his autobiography is very proud that he was baptized in this church. That would have been 1835. Patsy Conway's band rehearsed in the basement. Conway was our John Philip Sousa. And the reason why he's not as famous as John Philip Sousa is he only wrote 2 marches. Sousa wrote scores. And when they were billed on the same bill, Conway's name was frequently above Sousa and his band. So that's another distinction that this building has. Anyway, Russ, it's been wonderful, and I have something else for you which I can't find. But we want you to have a copy of our redact,
Thank you.
and a copy of.
Thank you very much. Very
And
thoughtful.
I'll find you something else,
No,
which I can't find.
He's cleaning out his room.
you're adding to my library.
I am, yeah. Yeah, it's the thank you letter, and
Is it in your pocket?
ah, there it is. I knew I stuck it somewhere. Anyway, there's still more refreshments. This is the last program of the year. Thank you to all of you who came out. Thank you for those of you who provided refreshments. Thank you for all of you who still support this place. We couldn't do it without you. And if you're not a member, it's only $5 a year.
Wow.
There is no bargain better than that. Life membership is $100, whether you're 5 or 105. Anyway, family is, I think, 10. Family is 10, so it's pretty cheap. Anna. Oh, we have a sign-up sheet. Yeah, be sure to sign this. No, this is not it. Lauren, did you give me a sign-up sheet? Okay, make sure you sign this sheet because we have to report to the State Education Department.
Bud, could you hold up the plaque?
Oh, sure. It is heavy. Can you get that?
Yep.
Okay.
Show them where it's going.
Did we decide over here? Okay, the plaque will be mounted here. So, and Steve can come back and see it.
Absolutely.
And then we'll rip the curtain off, okay? Anyway, I don't have a sign-up sheet, so please sign the back of this before you leave. Name, email address would be terrific.